Rain clung to my coat like shame, gathering on the shoulders and slipping down my back in cold, insistent rivulets. The world blurred on raw de misericordia, small halos of lamplight winking in puddles at my feet as I stared through the gallery window, trying to see inside. My heart thudded behind my ribs, stubborn and lonely. Inside, the warm, dry light softly glazed the sleek white walls. People crowded around abstract sculptures and oil paintings, wine glasses in hand, their laughter muffled but not unreachable. My violin, the one I had spent 16 months carving and coaxing from slow-growing Carpathian spruce, sat silent in the corner, ignored. Its maple shone, the kind of golden glow achieved only with patience and secret mixtures of amber varnish. If anyone noticed, they gave no sign. Instead, they hovered around a modernist cello whose sharp angles irritated my teeth, and a garish, mass-produced French violin resting on a pillar of polished steel. Mine was too classical, perhaps too earnest, too obviously made by someone who still believed in the tactile honesty of human hands. When I entered, the hostess barely glanced over. "Ah, Martin, thank you for coming. The jury found your piece. Well, quaint," she said quietly as if I were a child. "Maybe next time try something less traditional." Her words skittered into my head and stuck there, sharp as glass. I nodded, managed a thin smile and turned away. The room brimmed with that Lisbon hush, a kind of dismissive murmur, and I knew suddenly, numbly, that I had been quietly banished. The light in my violin's varnish only emphasized its unworthiness in these eyes. I slipped the violin into its case and left before the rain could stop. Out on the steps, I clutched the handle, knuckles whitening. Each splash on my face woke a memory: my mother's sigh when she saw wood shavings filling the kitchen, my uncle's bemused grin as he told neighbors he's making fiddles instead of finding a real job, and the way the local barista would ask, "Como vai o Stradivari de Alfama?" accompanied by gentle, almost pitying laughter. Under my grandmother's old awning, I waited for the rain to thin. I listened to cars sliding over cobbles, to young people singing drunken fado on a balcony across the street, to the dense, insistent silence inside me. I imagined for a moment dropping the violin, letting it shatter, but even in anger, even numbed by rejection, I couldn't let go of what I had made, my hands curling tighter. Lisbon's humidity seemed to coil inside my lungs as I walked home through Bexar, earnestly counting the coins in my pocket. The city was an embracing thing in good times, full of sunlight, all ochre tiles and blue azulejos. On nights like this it pressed in, watching and remembering everything you failed to be. By the time I reached my tiny apartment above the tile shop, fog had crept in through the cracked windows. I set the violin case on my work table beside a half-carved viola scroll and let myself be still. The clock ticked, my resolve coiled quietly. If tradition was foolish, so be it. I believed in the living breath that passed through aged wood, in the slip of resin on horsehair, in the reverence of making something beautiful and true, even if nobody else cared. The gallery never called me back. Word got around, as word does in our tight old neighborhoods, trickling from mouths over morning pastries and strong black coffee in the Praça das Flores. "He's wasting his time. Violins here." "In this economy?" Grandmother asked, not unkindly, if I'd consider a job at the pharmacy. I didn't answer. Instead, I settled deeper inside my world, spending mornings in the luthier's shop I'd built from 2 rented rooms, filling it with the smell of linseed and sawdust, the walls humming with old radio fado and the patient scrape of gouges over spruce. I studied the old masters, Maso Okada's precise curvature, Stradivari's mythic proportions. I carved in silence till my hands ached, fitting the necks by candlelight, crafting pegs that clicked just right. At times, only the lilt and sigh of each soundpost gave me companionship. I worked odd jobs, tuning battered school instruments, repairing broken pegs for orchestras most of Lisbon barely knew existed. My shoes grew thin, fingers calloused and ink-stained. There were months when I wondered if the gallery was right. Still, every evening I poured everything I knew, every splinter of hope and heartbreak, into the next violin. One autumn evening, while replacing the bridge on a battered cello for a visiting quartet, their first violinist heard the clear resonance of one of my creations. My hands were busy, and I spoke little. He ran a practice bow across the strings, and as the sound filled my tiny shop, he stopped, his brow furrowed. "Where did you find this?" he demanded in accented English. "I made it," I said, uncertain. He played a phrase, then another. Slowly his face loosened into a slow, almost reverent surprise. The cellist joined him. For the first time my work was met not with laughter, but with unguarded admiration. By the end of that week, I'd sold my first custom violin to a touring musician who said he heard in it something raw and deeply Portuguese. Skepticism at the conservatory turned to curiosity. Whispers nothing like the ones that dogged me before filtered through women in the pastry shops and musicians in the Bairro Alto, enough to buy more wood to eat better, to think beyond simply surviving. Word spread further, pulled along by the slow current of those who heard my violins in concerts, by musicians who hungered for instruments shaped not by machines, but by a soul. A respected violinist from Berlin wrote to me, asking if I might consider crafting something for her daughter. A musicologist from Porto requested a viola. Each piece became a letter sent to the world, and sometimes the world answered slowly and unpredictably. I worked in long, steady silences. Lisbon changed around me, tram lines were renewed, new cafes found old corners, tourists blurred through the streets. My shop filled up with notes from musicians, tickets from performances, even a faded clipping from a German newspaper calling me O Luthier de Lisboa. Years slipped by and my reputation grew. I was interviewed for a documentary about artisan crafts. I sent 2 violins to London, 1 to Tokyo. Money came in, a little at first, then enough that I could afford to move from the drafty apartment to a sunnier studio in Campo de Aurique. Strangers began asking for Martin's violins at music shops. Even so, when I passed the old neighborhood, I caught the familiar glances. They remembered the boy who had swept sawdust instead of studying engineering. Then one spring morning came an invitation that stopped me cold. The Lisbon Philharmonic wanted to feature a new premiere, a concerto for violin, played on one of my instruments. There would be a reception, a small exhibition of my work in the lobby, and a public acknowledgement by the conductor himself. My hands shook as I read the letter, old ghosts rousing, but something like pride began to grow. I called my mother. She said, "That's wonderful, Philho." Her voice was flat but unsure, as if part of her waited for the other shoe to drop. I told her the date. I told her it would be at the São Carlos Opera House. "It's close to home," she said softly. On the night of the premiere, I stepped out of a taxi and into the square, violin case in hand. Spring had come to Lisbon at last. The tiles gleamed in the lantern light, and the jacaranda trees scattered petals in purple drifts across the cobbles. I paused for a moment under the archway, watching the audience filter in, men in suits, women in elegant dresses. I recognized local politicians, old musicians, even a journalist from El País. Inside the lobby, 4 of my instruments were displayed on velvet stands, 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. I watched people wander over, drawn by the wood's warmth. Among them I saw my uncle, arms folded, wearing a suit that looked out of place on him. My mother beside him, straight-backed and small, eyes moving quickly over the gathering crowd. The ceremony started. The conductor spoke of Lisbon's tradition of crafts, of the value of patience, of things made slowly in a world that no longer knew how to wait. He introduced me by name. There was polite applause. My family didn't move. Then the concerto began. The soloist, a young violinist from Coimbra, picked up the violin I had named Almada after the sunlight in my grandfather's orchard. She tested the strings, then lifted the instrument, tucking it under her chin. Each note slipped into the air like clear rain. The auditorium stilled. The violin's voice was full and warm, a sound I knew by heart, yet hearing it from afar was like seeing a child you made stand tall before the world. I watched the faces, skepticism faded, my uncle leaned forward, my mother pressed her hand to her chest. The crowd was not politely attentive now but transfixed. Near the end of the first movement, a single high note hung, trembling on the brink of silence. You could hear the city outside, the far-off horn, the tram's bell, and yet the violin held them at bay for a breathless moment, the sum of all my defeats and my hope and my lonely, stubborn hours of work. When the orchestra fell away and the violin finished alone, the applause was not polite but thunderous. After in the lobby I stood beside my instruments. The conductor shook my hand, the soloist hugged me. Strangers came, some with tears, some with clipped business cards. People who had never believed in my dream now fought to congratulate me. My mother stood outside the circle. I found her, pressed her hand. "You see," I said simply, "it was not ridiculous." She looked at me, eyes shining. "Nunca duvidei Martim," she said, the lie gentle and loving. I never doubted. My uncle approached, quieter now. He picked up one of the violins on display, running his thick fingers over the varnish. "Beautiful," he said, turning the word over like a new coin. "We were wrong. We're proud, Martim." In that moment, the years between us softened. All the rain-soaked nights, the mutters in neighborhood shops, the laughter lost their power. I could see my journey mapped in their faces, the memory of the boy who wouldn't let go of his foolish dream, the man returned home, no longer begging for approval but standing whole on his own ground. The celebrations carried on into the night, but I withdrew early, quietly, slipping from the lights and music out into the Lisbon air. The square was nearly empty now, hush settling over the city. The jacaranda petals had drifted together along the curb, fragrant in the cool breeze off the river. I walked home with the empty violin case at my side, feeling neither triumph nor vindication so much as a deep, rich peace. I did not need the applause or the shocked admiration of those who had doubted me. I had kept faith through silence and struggle, and my work, carved from hope, patience, and a stubborn love for the honest song of wood and string, had found its true audience. As I reached my old building in Alfama, I looked up at the window I once stared through on lonely nights. There was light in it now, glimmering against the rain-clean tiles, and with it, a future shaped by my own hands.